Notice anything different? Aleco Chigounis, a legend. He has been a long time presence in the specialty coffee industry. He currently owns a coffee company which he founded in the early 2010s. But before that has had a really long life. So long life in the coffee world. So for us fanboys who have been around for a second, we really got to know his name when he had a small but very impactful stint at Stumptown. It was 5 years. That's a long time. And we got him on the show today. Are we calling it a show? Let's call it a show. And we talked about all things coffee. We had a great riff talking about direct trade. Is it still a thing? All things Peru. I really think you'll enjoy this. He's the kind of guy that you know when you go into a conversation with him, you will come out of it a whole lot smarter, like more than that. Have a listen to this. Put it in the background. Get your cup of coffee. Maybe have some breakfast. Get your favorite Excel sheet out and hear what this man has to say. It's pretty important. As always, thanks for listening and keep drinking good coffee. Dude, so Aleco, thank you. Thanks for joining in.
My pleasure.
Really excited to have you on board. I've been a fan of yours for an incredibly long time and had some good opportunities to really catch up with you whilst traveling, more so traveling than here, which is kind of like a fun sort of unique thing about being a coffee buyer is, you know, the traveling and then of course just the comrade. What's the word I'm looking for? The friendship.
Yeah, friendship.
that you can create when traveling, because you're really just out there exposed, you know. First of all, how do you pronounce your last name?
Chigounis. Chigounis, it's a Greek name. My father's father, my grandfather, came over from Greece in the early 1900s, from southern Greece. Yeah, we're from Sparta, actually, believe it or not.
Wow.
And it's our Greek name.
And then, so yeah, tell us a little bit about Red Fox, when you started, you know, what you're doing.
Sure. We are about to finish up our 7th year here. We opened the business in January 2014. And it's been, you know, a pretty great ride this year, maybe outside of that spectrum, but it's been really fun. We started the business. My father is my business partner. And it started, he and I and Julia Ferris, who basically started day one. And she's helped me guide the ship running the company since then and still does. So this day, I'm very fortunate to have her. We've grown substantially. So we started, you know, kind of classic startup business. The first few months were in my apartment. Then we moved, I think in the 5th month, to a tiny little 300 square foot studio in West Oakland. Grew out of that about a year or so later and moved to Berkeley, where we've been ever since, at least the U.S. operations. We have 12 people on the team on the U.S. side of things. But in 2017, we opened our first sourcing and export company in Lima, Peru, where you visited us before, just over a year ago, I believe. Yeah. That has been... Peru itself has been a huge part of the vision for Red Fox since I wrote the business plan, really, and really years before that, as a country where everyone knew there was good coffee, but I don't think the marketplace had great access to it. I think a lot of the specialty segment thought of Peru as a country that produced certified coffees only, you know, like full container load FTO stuff that they could that was suitable for blends or what have you. And as it turns out, there's really just absolutely phenomenal coffee there. We're sourcing coffee from the south extensively, Puno and Cusco. And then we have really special long-term relationships in Amazonas and Cajamarca, where the coffees are absolutely exceptional. It's a little bit more competitive up in the north and a little more easy to access. So we focused on the south more, especially in Cusco and Puno. That office now has 4 employees. It's led by Ali Newcomb. Ali is American Peruvian, grew up here in the Bay, in Bolinas, but has been down in Peru for, I think, just about a decade. She's been with us since we opened the office 4 years ago. Really great, really talented person as well. And she guides the ship there with 4 people on that team. Or excuse me, 3 people on that team. And we have just recently opened our 3rd office, our 2nd sourcing operation in Oaxaca, in Mexico. That opened this past March. So we went through our first season right in the middle, or right as COVID hit, let's say. You know, the buying and shipping season there is February into June. So that was a little tumultuous, but I have to say, all things considered, it was really successful. Coffees moved quickly. They all got allocated quickly. The quality was great. And so we feel like that is kind of what the future holds for us as these kinds of operations on the ground in origin, working with different supply chain partners and obviously producers, especially in coffee development, and working in the parts of these countries that the coffee growing communities that are a little bit harder to reach, a little bit more isolated. That's where we think we have more value. We prefer to do that than to go toe to toe with some of the bigger companies that are better resourced than we are, and going after the same coffees, you know, fighting for the same coffees versus going out and developing something that doesn't really exist in the market. So that's where we are at this point. You know, the mantra has been to find the most unique, rare coffees we can, and I feel like we're actually living up to it. So
yeah, man. Well, I'm a fan of your coffees for sure. And so what, you know, setting up office at Origin, like how does that, you know, help you in your quest for, you know, finding these coffees? Like, you know, is that a critical part?
yeah, I mean, you know me, I grew up in a coffee company. I actually don't know if you knew that. My family has been part of a roasting company that started in the 1920s, roasting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up, in the Philadelphia, South Jersey area. So I grew up, you know, lugging bags to the 3-bag burns that they were roasting on back then, and learning how to fix brewing equipment, tarring the roof, delivering coffee, all of that stuff. And when I got through that and finished college, I wanted to get out, so I moved to Costa Rica. I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to work with Arnaldo Leyva at the Coffee Source and Rodrigo Vargas, who owned Doca Estate, and learn production and export firsthand. I was supposed to go down there for a few months for a season, and I ended up staying for 4 years. I left Arnaldo's company, the Coffee Source, and went and started a project with the Neumann Group that I ran for 3 years after that down there. Before I met Dwayne at Stumptown, I moved to Stumptown. I became the coffee buyer. I was there for 5 years as well before I moved down to the Bay. So that's maybe a long way of saying that all of my history, really, once I left Philadelphia, is on the production and export side. And that's been my entire focus for the last 18 years of my professional life. So that's where I think I have value in probably the most basic way of saying it, like understanding the supply chain, how it works, how to be effective, how to add value in that lane. I'm not an agronomist. No one who works at Red Fox is an agronomist. We work with farmers based on the expertise and experience we've had over the years, but they do what they do far better than any way we could influence it. So Red Fox is basically built around the idea of going out, finding these harder to reach origins, these producers who haven't accessed the market, working collectively with them, and then navigating the rest of the supply chain from there, making sure coffee gets milled quickly, shipped quickly, delivered on time. And I think that's probably our biggest strength of all. And of course, hopefully building on past relationships. You and I have been friends for over a decade, I believe, at this point. And we have some similar relationships like that, whether they're mine or Adam McClellan's or Gabby Wright's or Rachel Stanich's or whomever one of the reps are at Red Fox. That's been the modus operandi.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions for you is, like for me coming up through the ranks, I remember I was living in Dublin in Ireland, and we started hearing about this thing called direct trade, and there was this buzz about it, and when we were hearing about it, it was three companies. It was Intelligentsia, Stumptown, and Counterculture, and not in any order. Coming over, starting to work for Intelligentsia, there were really sort of three people that us that were in the roasting business and roasters on the ground were looking towards and aspiring to, and it was Jeff Watts, Peter Giuliani, and Aleco. Your name was in there, and that was my question. Was because I remember you telling me you had a vast amount of experience before you even hit Stumptown. So you kind of answered my question there about your history there. But when did you actually start at Stumptown? What year was that?
I started in February 2007. I actually spent the year before in Los Angeles working for Rick Reinhardt. Rick Reinhardt, who was most recently the executive director of SCAA. It's since moved on. He was one of the partners in Groundwork Coffee in Los Angeles, and also one of my bigger clients while I was living in Costa Rica exporting coffee. So he and I had formed a really great friendship, which we still have. He asked me to come up to be the buyer, which I did. But about a year into it, Dwayne Sorensen from Stumptown offered me the position to come up and be the buyer there. And I just felt like they had so much momentum and real traction for having like heavier impact in the national marketplace. Like they were on a trajectory, and at my age, when I was, not quite 30 at that point, I felt like it was the right move for me to go up there. So I went up there February 2007, and I stayed exactly 5 years. I left February 2012 to come down to the Bay.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah.
And they were quite pivotal years, I think, not only for Stumptown, but for Intelligentsia. Like 2007, it might maybe because I just landed in America in 2007, but for me, it felt like the energy around Intelligentsia, Stumptown, and we'll just stick with those two. Was really electrifying, and there was something about those companies that were just. I mean, that was just what everyone was aspiring to, which is interesting because, am I right? Like Stumptown was the first to coin the word or the term direct trade.
I don't know. Like what you had alluded to a few minutes ago, I think Stumptown, Intelligentsia, and Counterculture were at the forefront. And it was certainly Jeff Watts, with Dwayne Sorensen from Stumptown and Peter from Counterculture that were driving that. So I was not there in that moment when direct trade became like first hit the scene, let's say, but I came in soon after that. So I can't tell you which one did. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. I don't really know.
I mean, from my memory, hearing stories from Doug Zell, who's probably widely known as being competitive, slightly competitive. He was saying that I think Stumptown tried to trademark it, and there was a trademark battle, and they got into they got into is it common use name or word, and I'm sure someone who's going to listen to this might contradict or might have the real story, but it went down a path of some sort of legal back and forth apparently, but it's not like people weren't doing direct trade, right? It's not like it Stumptown or Intelli or counterculture invented it, right? I mean, people were going down. I mean, I remember Bewley's of Ireland, where I roasted before I moved to America. They had relationships at farm level, but they never used that term.
Sure. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's hard. I think if anything, the term itself has just gotten more convoluted in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was perfectly defined back then. And I think part of the impediments between the Intelli's countercultures, Stumptowns moving forward with it, that even amongst the three of them, they couldn't really come to an understanding of what the specific measure should include that would define the term direct trade. So yeah, to me now, I don't even know what I think of it. We don't actually use it that much as a term at Red Fox, even though that's certainly how we operate, 100% of our trading. But yeah, absolutely. I think, the Pete's, the Bewley's, those level of roaster, we're buying coffees with some form of direct relationship with the producers long before we all came in. I think, you should get Jeff Watts on here or Dwayne or Peter or someone at some point to maybe do a better job than I can explaining for them. But
yeah,
I think the idea was to try to bring more transparency to the supply chain in terms of price paid back to the farm level, and to show the marketplace itself here on the consuming side that there were flaws in the way that coffee was traded historically, and that a lot of the money stayed in certain parts of the supply chain that were less deserving than the producer's end. That's probably it in a nutshell. But certainly there were larger companies, and I'm sure smaller companies, performing in what other folks would consider a direct trade manner prior to those three companies coming on the scene.
Yeah, and and I think it was just a sort of a convergence of like minds coming together at once, because I know that the Cup of Excellence program started up sort of around similar timelines, and I know that definitely as some of us who are traveling to Origin have used Cup of Excellence as a springboard into forming relationships at Origin. I know that Jeff Watts. I don't want to speak for him. If he's listening, if he would listen, but yeah, I know that they were helping the program in the initial stages get up and running and used some of that network.
Oh, absolutely. We were at Stumptown as well. I would say, even when I started there in 2007, the Cup of Excellence was basically our primary discovery mechanism. We would cup all of the coffees for any given auction, likely buy something, sometimes even the first place coffee, and then pursue those producers afterwards to form, the longer term relationships.
Yeah. I mean, why not? I mean, that's really what it was about, right? Susie Spindler was setting it up with the idea of, putting a name and a face to the coffee that we're drinking. I mean,
Yeah.
before that sort of initiative, it was just being lost in regional, like under regional sort of umbrella terms, or like Columbia Supremo, or something like that.
Like I think George and Susie and the founders, I don't know if it was late '90s, early 2000s, whenever it was that it actually happens. I think the principal idea was to reward farmers for producing quality. And then, yeah, like the primary secondary effect of the whole thing was that now these farmers had an avenue to a better marketplace than they've had before as well. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think I think you touched on it before when you said you don't really know how to use or you don't use direct trade as a term anymore, and I've definitely noticed a swing back where even, you know, there's a little bit of a kickback about, people traveling down to Origin and doing that, because I think it moved more into like an ecotourism thing. Like there were busloads of people going down and touching coffee leaves and then saying, "Look what we've done." Like we pushed some coffee around a drying bed, and here's our relationship now. Like,
Yeah, it became more about being a photograph shaking hands with a farmer than the actual philosophy of doing business. And, if people want to use that term, that's great. I just personally find it confusing at this point. So instead of just using a blanket term, we're basically going to write out the way we operate as transparently as possible and share that information with anyone in the world who wants to see it, and just do that instead of sticking a label on it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I do use the word or the term on some of our relationships. So the relationship I have with Marissa Bell Caballero and Moses Ferreira, I've known them and have been roasting their coffees since 2007, and that I'm comfortable to do that. You know, um,
I love those two, by the way.
oh
Two of
my god, yeah.
my favorite coffee people. And one of my favorite places to visit, although it's been years and years, but to go see them in Marcala is really a beautiful experience.
It really is. Yeah, they're just the nicest people, and that, and I have so much value with that. I find personal, the personal relationship that I've built up with them over the years. I mean, I've seen their kids grow up and go to school here in America, and they've seen me as I've sort of climbed the ladder, the coffee ladder, and they helped me when we first launched our business here in 2016, and in ways that uh, you know are hard to repay, other than just by you know buying their coffees, and they're really good coffees anyway. They're exceptional people. So yeah, that relationship is blossomed into something otherly, but I can still call that, and I still am comfortable calling that direct trade. But others I more or less have now, you know, we call it relationship at best. I don't know. I mean, there's no classification, right? There's no
Sure.
school on this, really, on what the process is. At the end of the day, it's trading, right? We're buying a product and we're selling it.
And I think Tectonic is really good at spelling out the way that you all work as well with your audience. So, I have no issue with using the term whatsoever. Yeah.
Mm. Um, yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, and I definitely have seen awareness in the industry, and people are hyper aware, as of like the imagery that people use and exploitation and whatnot. And so it's an interesting time to be a coffee buyer and traveling. We have to be diligent and super careful, but that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I hopefully I know for myself, I've been reflective about the last 15 plus years of my life and the impact of the travel and what's actually necessary and unnecessary. And I mean, it is at the core of what we do. So a pretty consistent level is important for us, but I think it is, what needs to happen and not happen in this day in technology and the ability to communicate and get what you need without necessarily having to do the extensive line of travel is something to think about at the very least.
It is, and the importers have really stepped up to the plate as well, right? I mean, coffee quality seemingly is the bar of coffee quality is just getting higher and higher and higher as there's more and more of us roasters popping up, and so I think like you and Cafe Imports, you guys both have sort of brands names now that people are aware of, right through to the supply chain, all the way down to the barista. Like when I was coming up as a barista, I was 9 or 10 years as a barista. I had no idea who the importers were. No clue. And even at Intelligentsia, I mean, it wasn't until I started buying at Toby's estate in Brooklyn that I sort of went through this door and sort of pulled back the beads that were hanging down, and were like, oh shit, here are all the importers, And then literally from like 2010, I think the importers, whether intentionally or not, have just become such an integral part of the specialty coffee industry, I guess, that barista level knowledge of importers is a thing now. What do you think?
No, I think that's interesting. And for us, to be perfectly honest, that's what we've always wanted. And in fact, hopefully we can go one step beyond that to the consumer at some point. And just purely in hopes of helping our clients and our roaster friends like yourself. When I started the company, or I guess just a few years prior to the company, was really like the beginning of me learning about wine and natural wine and just wine in general, I would say. And, going into a wine shop and wanting to buy a bottle and not really knowing what anything was, and certainly not having experience, like having tried anything. And, I might know that like, oh, well, I've liked this Beaujolais, or I've liked wines from the Loire before. And I wouldn't know what I was doing, but over time, I would know that there were certain importers that I would like. So I could turn the back of the bottle around and see that it said Selection Massal or Percy's Selections or Soil Expedition or whoever it was, and be like, well, I don't know this wine. I've never had it, but I've liked other wines from this importer. So I'd like to take a flyer on this bottle. And we think that if it's hitting the barista level, that's probably the best critical mass that could happen. If a barista knows, like, hey, we've had great coffees from Red Fox before, or Cafe Imports or whomever, that they have more confidence in talking about the coffees to a customer, or they're just excited about the coffees for themselves. That's the ideal scenario for us. And that maybe there's no way that coffee importers become, like a household name like a wine importer does down the line, I don't think. But, to have that kind of piece of the conversation like it wasn't had before, I think is great. And that's certainly what we're going for.
Yeah, well, it's happened, and if that was an intentional part of your business plan, then kudos. I think you've definitely reached it, that critical mass. So, wow, that was kind of a cool little free flow there. Again, like I'm really just happy to be talking to you. This is pretty cool. But let's bring it back to coffee in Peru.
Sure.
Firstly, when we started the conversation, you started telling us about the regions, and for people that may or may not know, like maybe in reference to Lima, like the capital, where are these regions? You said south and then north, east, west.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, sure. I'm a map junkie. I love geography, so this is right up my alley.
If you were to look at a map of South America, I feel like those countries are so large, people don't understand necessarily how significantly sized Peru is. Peru is big. Is bigger in landmass than Colombia, which doesn't necessarily appear so on the map. It's gigantic. Lima is right on the coast, central coast, maybe a little bit south of perfectly central, and it's the capital of the country. The entire middle of the country is basically one series of Andes mountain chains, top to bottom, and they get significantly larger in the bottom. So let's start from the top and get down there. Cajamarca is the northernmost producing region in Peru. It borders Ecuador all the way up at the north. Jaén, Jaen, is basically the coffee epicenter of Peru. It's reminiscent of other coffee towns in other countries. If you've ever been to Buesaco in Nariño, Colombia, or certain neighborhoods of Antigua, Guatemala, where if you go into Jaén in August, September, October, you're going to see coffee warehouses everywhere, just little tiny warehouses with basically bags of parchment overflowing through the door because there's not enough room for all of it. And as lame as this might sound, I get really excited seeing that stuff. I love the idea of the coffee trade. So Jaén is the main town there, and more of the most famous producing areas in Cajamarca are just north of Jaén. Jaén itself encompasses a couple really beautiful producing regions. Guabal is one of my absolute favorites. And then just over the border is San Ignacio, the border of Jaén inside of Cajamarca. And San Ignacio has producing areas that go all the way up to touch the border of Ecuador. And those coffees are some of the most renowned coffees in all of South America. Really stunning coffees. We buy a significant part of our volume from both Jaén and San Ignacio, but we're also extremely interested in the areas that are just south of Jaén. Areas like Cutervo, areas like Chota, and these are coffee growing areas with extreme altitude. Coffee that's well above 2,000 meters in lots of instances, and a whole lot of it at 1,800, 1,900 meters, which is really special altitude, as you know. Those are really exciting places, and places where we put a little bit more focus on in the last handful of years in the north, along with Jaén and San Ignacio. So just east of Cajamarca is Amazonas. And Amazonas is another really important region for us. And there's a protected reserve called Alto Mayo. And in Alto Mayo, there's a really great group that was probably, I think, the first group we started working with in the north 6 years ago, maybe, called Copebam. We do really great coffees with them as well. Really beautiful, stunning area. So Amazonas and Cajamarca are kind of equally up there in the northern part of the country, are where we're working primarily in the north. And then in the Selva Central, which is the center part of the country, we have a couple really strong relationships in Junín. Junín was primarily settled by European immigrants in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So there are a lot of huge plantations out in Junín and a lot of really large cooperatives and centralized wet mills. We're working with smallholders exclusively that are a little deeper in the forest. Really extreme altitude, once again, which is just the theme in Peru. Altitude is as high, and there's more 2,000 meter coffee growing in Peru than anywhere else I've seen, maybe including Ethiopia as well. So going south from Junin, you get to Ayacucho, which produces a little bit of coffee. We're not working there currently. And just south of Ayacucho is Cusco. And Cusco is, for us, if Cusco was its own country, it would be our second largest origin by volume of what we buy and sell. Wow. We do a whole lot of Cusco. And Cusco is split into a couple primary valleys, gigantic valleys. La Convención, which runs north from the border of Ayacucho, all the way down through the town of Quillabamba. Quillabamba is the high-end equivalent in Cusco. It's a very large coffee trading town, a few hours away from the city of Cusco itself. And then the other valley there is Calca, where we're buying a significant portion of our coffee as well. Really beautiful coffee, is a whole lot of 2,000-meter coffee. More Old Typica and Bourbon than you find in the north. Though those varieties exist in the north, you'll find more of it in the south. And those coffees can be absolutely exceptional. And then south of Cusco is Puno. And Puno, the coffee growing region, is the furthest south in the entire country. And that region butts up right against the border of Bolivia. The valley is called the Sandia Valley. That's where I first started buying coffee in Peru many, many years ago, well before Red Fox. And it's a very interesting producing area just in terms of it being a different tribe than other parts of the country. South is different from Cusco, is different from Junin or Cajamarca as well. But the Puno tribe, known as the Aymara, are very specific to Puno and then also Bolivia. So you actually meet a lot of folks down there who have family on both sides of the border, and they identify more with themselves on either side of the border than they do actually with other parts of Peru, which culturally is just like, it's fascinating to me. And some of the coffees there are absolutely exceptional as well. They have some of the old Bourbon. It's my understanding, a little tidbit about that Bourbon, is that the United Nations brought it in the 80s as a replanting project, which is interesting because by then Catimor and some of the F-series varieties from Colombia were being used more often in Central America and Colombia as higher yielding mainly, and then in attempts of combating different fungal diseases. But the United Nations brought Bourbon to Puno, and it spread into Cusco and probably spread all the way to the north from there. And that's a big reason why the cup quality can be exceptional.
Wow. There you go. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, right there is the value of you being on the ground. I mean, just to recite all that from memory, that's...
Pardon me if I'm long-winded. I know once I get a little momentum, I'm hard to stop.
No, I mean, it's fascinating. And anyone who loves traveling will definitely enjoy what you just said. I can't wait to share it. Yeah, that's cool. And so this year, of course... So I went to Peru last year and attended the Cup of Excellence as a judge, and my goal was to strike up some relationships, but that all fell through because of the pandemic. What are you going to do? But this year we bought a coffee from you, and I'll cut this so it looks a bit cleaner. Jose Joel Perez Diaz.
Jose Joel Perez Diaz. He is new to us this season. So Jose Joel is a member of a cooperative that we've been working with for the last 5 or 6 years called Santuario. And Santuario is one of those cooperatives that's based in Jaén. Historically, because the leaders of the cooperative are from areas like Chirinos and that area that kind of straddles the San Ignacio Jaén border. That's where most of the coffees come from, and we love those coffees. But they have since, in the last maybe season and a half, not even 2 full seasons, have expanded their membership to that area just south of Jaén that I mentioned, Cutervo. And Cutervo is incredibly exciting for us. Jose Joel specifically is from a village called Santo Tomas, and Santo Tomas hovers right at that 2,000-meter mark. Those coffees are a big part of what we'll do in the future in the north. Those coffees and the Chota coffees, which we used to buy in the past and have taken a couple years off from. But Jose Joel is basically, this is his first season delivering to Red Fox. And I know you speak with our own Joel Edwards at Red Fox. He wanted to make sure that he got you another one of those top coffees like you bought last year from us. So really exciting stuff.
Yeah. No, I just finished. I was actually, coincidentally, I was drinking it this morning when we dialed in, and we just released it. We shipped it out on Monday, just gone to our customers, and so and already we've had emails of people writing to us just saying, "Well, I can't believe this," which is really cool. Like I don't that to this day still excites me when someone writes or just shares like this wow moment with you. Oh wow, I can't believe coffee tastes like that. That's the stuff that you live for. And you're helping.
That's the reaction we're waiting for. That's why we do this, I feel like,
Yeah. We're like, hey, it's not just a means to an end, It's it really tastes very different and intriguing, so that's cool. And yeah, sort of getting close towards the end of this, but how did Peru go, man, through the pandemic? How did they handle it? I hear it through some people that it kind of went through the population unabated. But what did you hear?
They had a rough go, and they're still having a rough go. They were one of the harder hit countries spring into summer. They even had, I believe it was 3 weeks of full lockdown. Where people were only allowed to leave their house once a week for an hour or so to pick up groceries or what have you. Wow. I think the police were policing the streets, making sure people were in their home. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle in a country where, in like Peru, where just culturally and socially things happen in close context, like markets, the way that works, the outdoor market, even though it is outside, people are huddled together. And that's just, I don't know if there is another way, or at least they haven't found it. And that's the way they've been doing it forever. So it's, I think, difficult to get people to curb some of their normal behavior that they would. And at this point, what I've heard recently is that the government of Peru, which is also in a bunch of turmoil right now, has said something like 50% of the population has already been infected. So I don't know if they're hoping for herd immunity or what at this point, but it's been tough, and it's they're having the same kind of wave that we're having here, ups and downs.
Yeah, I was speaking to another Casey O'Keefe, who's a mentor of mine. He taught me a lot. He was actually on the ground in LA, in Los Angeles, when we opened up the roasting facility here in LA, and he basically, his standard of teaching us, I'm on a tangent, but his standard of teaching us to be the control specialists, quality control specialists there were basically the teachings from the Q graders exams. And I randomly I got gifted a course at the Q graders here in Long Beach by Mark Dundon out of Seven Seeds. He couldn't make it last minute, and he said, "Here, Deaton, do this, do it if you can." And it was literally like 3 days away. I had no time to prep, and was able to pass it first time. And I really, first go, and I owe that to KC. But anyway, he was saying that. Yeah, he believes the country, he lives there, right? So he believes the country may be the first to get and obtain herd immunity, which is just sad, and it's just
tough to think.
It's hard to think.
I signed in about KC. KC is one of my oldest friends in coffee, and someone who I really admire and respect. I think he might be the single hardest working man in the industry.
He definitely throws it all in there. Yeah, definitely love that guy. Always have. I guess the last question, we talked about the impact of the virus at origin, in particular just Peru, but how was it for you in America being in the middle of I think really, we all were pinched in our own ways, but I think importers had a bit of a tough go because, volumes went down for the most part, and things got a little tense and tight. How did it go for you?
It's been a wild year, with the pandemic really like cementing itself here April into May. Like we had our shelter in place orders from Governor Newsom in mid-March, but I think it was really like April, May that we at least started realizing like, hey, we're going to be in our homes for a lot longer than these few weeks that we first mandated. And it was tough because that March into April into May season is really the core buying season for us in Mexico and Ethiopia, which Peru is our largest origin, Ethiopia is second, and Mexico is third.
Wow. So
really, it was crippling. I think we have a really great team of people from the leadership all the way through the team. I'm really excited about the crew that we have. But it was tough. And we talked about it together for a while. And what we ended up doing was dialing back our Mexico purchasing and our Ethiopia purchasing this spring, which honestly, in hindsight, I really regret because we could have sold that coffee. We had the market for that coffee, but our biggest fear at that moment was running into spring 2021 long these coffees, which is basically a death sentence for an importer. So we cut back, we survived. We've effectively kept the whole team together throughout the year. We're going to be down just a little bit, but we see it like a really bright future out there. We're going to need to get a little bit of momentum at the beginning of 21, but we think we are going to be up and running like full steam again, hopefully by Q2, Q3, 21 next year. It's been on the personal front odd because you've known me for a decade. I travel constantly. Whether it's Peru, Mexico, Ethiopia, Colombia, wherever we're working, and to be here for the last 8 months has been a little odd, but maybe good, maybe helpful for a little self-reflection and thinking about the best way to pull this off going forward.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't see any claw marks in the paint behind you on the wall there, so you must be keeping it together. All right, mate. Well, I think we'll just end it on a good note like that. I'm really, thankful that your company is going to make it through, and you're able to continue keeping your staff on, and people in the lifestyle that they're quarantine lifestyle that they've forcefully gotten used to. But
we get through this next part.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think this third spike is very worrisome. We're really hitting some high numbers, right? 150, 140,000 cases a day is terrifying. And, I don't want to get too political, but it's a little hard not to when we're not getting really the federal guidance that we should have been. And so it sort of feels like it's up to us, and if I had my way, even though it's counterintuitive, for the people's sake, for our friends and family's sake, for my staff's sake, I would love to shut it down again. Let's reel it back in, because at the moment, no one's even talking about it, or barely talking about it.
Yeah, I guess I'm not entirely against it. I do respect Dr. Fauci's commentary, and he doesn't think we're quite there yet. But if that's what it would take, if it took being locked down for a month to ensure a faster recovery, then sure, I'm for it. Count me in.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see. All right, mate. Well, don't go away. I'll just hang this up. I'll turn all this stuff off and then I'll say goodbye. But yeah, thanks for dialing in. I'm looking at you here, but the camera's here. Thanks for calling in, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do a cup in person soon.
I can't wait. Yeah, give my best to Chelsea and the crew too, please.
I will, and your crew as well.
Will do.